You're listening to On Shifting Ground from World Affairs and KQED. I'm Ray Suarez. In late May, I traveled to Detroit to speak with representatives from the 21 member economies of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum. At that summit, high-level trade conversations continued, talks that have the potential to reshape global commerce and the future of foreign governments. And at the center of it all was United States Trade Representative Katherine Tai, as she played host for the ministerial meetings.
Hello, everyone. Fellow ministers, heads of delegations, it is my enormous pleasure to call this meeting of APEC Ministers Responsible for Trade to order.
Ambassador Tai was sworn in as the 19th U.S. Trade Representative in March 2021. As a member of the President's cabinet, she's the principal trade advisor, negotiator, and spokesperson on U.S. trade policy. And at an APEC press conference, she shared her vision for how international trade can reshape the world.
We meet at a time of shared uncertainty and challenges in the global economy, including fragile supply chains, a growing inequality, and a worsening climate crisis. In light of this, we must assess where we are and think creatively to better prepare ourselves for a more resilient and sustainable future.
The APEC member economies had many points of agreement, but a major wild card at the ministerial was how U.S.-China relations would impact the meetings. The competitive relationship between the two superpowers remains lukewarm. But in recent weeks, prominent U.S. officials like Janet Yellen and John Kerry have attempted to find common ground with their Chinese counterparts. Ambassador Tai and Chinese Commerce Minister Wang Wentao may have provided an example for cooperation back in May, as both publicly committed to continued open dialogue. Tai holds an important and difficult post in U.S. government as she tries to protect American interests, maintain international trade agreements, and resolve disputes with rivals. On the face of it, all of these don't seem compatible. So what priorities matter most to the U.S. Trade Representative? In early June, she joined me to talk about how that meeting in Detroit went and whether repairing our frayed relationship with China is even achievable. Well, I think we should start by setting the table, telling the audience a little bit more about the USTR, what the job entails, what the team is responsible for. People may remember the names Carla Hills, Mickey Cantor, Robert Zellick, Robert Strauss from over the years, but they may not know you, and they may not really know what this job entails.
The job is really described in its name, which is the United States Trade Representative. So my job is to represent the interests of the United States in trade policy, trade enforcement, trade negotiations. I spend a lot of time, as have the predecessors that I've had that you just named, traveling around the world, meeting in places like Geneva at the World Trade Organization, Paris at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, participating in international trade forums and trade discussions as the representative of the United States. For me, being the U.S. Trade Representative also means pushing myself and my team here in the U.S. to travel outside of Washington and to get to the other parts of the United States. Because it's only by doing that that you can fully understand who it is that you are representing in those trade negotiations in those far-off places. That's why I've challenged myself and my team that for every international trip that I take, to try to pair it with a domestic trip. I've gone to recently a bison ranch in Colorado. I have visited small businesses all over the country, including recently in Arizona and also in Philadelphia. Visited textile mills in the Carolinas.
Something that we still have them.
We absolutely do have them, and they're doing really exciting and innovative work. And you really only appreciate that when you go there and you see the work, you meet the owners, and you meet the workers. We do still have manufacturing workers. We've got salmon processors up in Alaska who work full time for those couple months in the summer when the salmon start swimming upstream. And it's really been an incredible privilege to travel the United States to connect with all of our different communities, to meet our workers where they are, to meet our businesses where they have put down roots in order to be a better representative of U.S. trade interests abroad. And I just wanted to highlight that President Biden, when he asked me to join his team, asked me to lead on implementing a trade policy that is different from what we've done in the past many decades across administrations. And that is to put workers at the center of our trade policy. And that has been one of the most important and fulfilling aspects of being U.S. Trade Representative for President Biden, which is to make sure that those trade negotiations and trade discussions that we have aren't just caught at that 60,000-foot level where you're talking about GDP numbers, trade flows, and trade balances, but that you're connecting all of that back to how does this impact the human beings in our economy who are not just consumers, but workers, people who have to earn a wage, who provide for their families, and who live in communities. And I think that that is the part of our work that I'm the most proud of.
I was in Detroit covering the ministerial where you were presiding as host. And I don't think I'm taking a risk by saying that the other 20 ambassadors came representing their workers too. And how you achieve American aims inside a vessel like APEC when everybody's looking out for their own interests. How do you do that?
Everybody's always looked out for their own interests, and that's part of what make trade negotiations so special. And I say special to mean they really are great exercises once you're done with them, but they're incredibly painful while you're going through them because everyone's negotiating from where they should be, representing the interests of their economies, their workers, and their businesses. I will share with you that what is gratifying about hosting the trade ministerial in Detroit was having trade ministers come up to me and say, oh, I'm finally connecting the dots on what you mean by the worker-centered trade policy. I talk a lot about President Biden's vision, and it's a very graphic one, of building the American economy from the bottom up and the middle out. And that this is in contrast with a top-down approach. Instead, you invest in the bottom and for all of the people who want to have a path to the middle class. And you create a path for them to the middle class so that you can broaden out the middle class. That's growing the economy from the middle out. And economies with strong middle classes are strong economies. They're vibrant. They provide opportunities. They really democratize economic opportunity for their people. And one of my counterparts came to me after one of our sessions and said, I get the vision now. And it's one that we absolutely also endorse. We are all trying to build out our middle classes. And the challenge is, how do we approach trade and economic cooperation in a way that will allow us to do that together? Because the traditional model has been one that's built on this idea of competition, of kind of a zero-sum game. When in reality, I think that there has to be a way for us to work together where we can all be providing for ourselves, our workers, building out that middle class in a collaborative way, in a way that truly grows the pie in the middle of the economy and not just at the top of the economy.
Foreign trade isn't just trade, is it? I mean, isn't it also an arm of foreign relations? Pursuing from our foreign relations. We've got democratic partners, strategic partners, who are also economic rivals, who would like nothing better than to beat us in certain product categories, who might look on with dismay as the U.S. announces new policies for its own domestic reasons, sourcing parts for cars, trade in high-end microprocessors, and the like. Is there a sort of intersection where trade as trade sort of collides with other national interests?
So trade is such an interesting area because we're constantly under pressure and we're constantly being pulled in different directions. So you're absolutely right. We are part of the foreign policy toolbox, but you know what? We're also part of the domestic economic policy toolbox. We sit right at the intersection of those two areas of policy, which means that we're constantly being pulled in those directions. You trade with your friends and allies, and so you want to open up your economies to each other at the same time. You also have to be guarding against giving up the livelihoods of huge swaths of your economy. And in fact, that's part of the origin story of USTR. We used to be a function inside of the State Department. And it was because the members of Congress, who, by the way, have authority under our Constitution for foreign commerce, the members of Congress on those two committees that have jurisdiction over USTR, the Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee, they got tired of having their constituents' livelihoods traded away for foreign policy reasons. And that's why they created USTR. They carved us out of the State Department, plopped us in very strategically here inside of the White House, and made us a raw nerve for Congress and those two committees in particular to push on, to make sure that we're constantly uncomfortable in this place and constantly trying to find the balance between foreign policy equities and domestic economic equities.
At the recent APEC meeting, the United States was sitting around a table with not only Russia, which is weird given the circumstances, but the People's Republic of China, which we've had a sort of bumpy conversation with over the past year. You met with your Chinese counterpart, Minister Wang Wentao. How did those conversations go?
I think that the most important part of that conversation, and I most recently saw Commerce Minister Wang on the margins of the APEC leaders meeting in Bangkok last fall. The most important part of this meeting was that it happened, that we had an opportunity representing our two governments who are going through, as you say, bumpy and complicated dynamics, to lay eyes on each other, to check back in. This is the first time I've seen him since the full transition to President Xi Jinping's unprecedented third term. He continues on as Commerce Minister. And to have a live conversation where we could, in very honest terms, share our concerns with each other and continue to build a relationship that is going to be critical to our two sides, responsibly managing all of the challenges between us in a way that upholds the global economic world order.
Protocol and custom and the done thing sort of intrude at this moment. You probably could have had that conversation with Wang Wentao in Mandarin. Do you have it in English and he in Mandarin just, well, for reasons that are apparent to both delegations?
Yes, I speak in English to make sure that everybody on my team understands what I've said and what I've not said. But being able to speak Mandarin means that I can double check our interpreters, who generally are really excellent, but to double check that they have conveyed what I wanted to in just the right way.
That family background, parents who were born on the mainland, raised in Taiwan, came here, you were born and raised here. Does that give you a broader view of Asia-Pacific questions just by circumstance than other ambassadors might have had?
It's possible. I've never specifically raised this topic with any of my predecessors, many of whom I am in good touch with. But I think it's very possible that is the case. When I show up in Asia to visit counterparts, I think that I am more recognized than I am sometimes here at home or in other places, that there are more people who have followed the story of the Asian American Pacific Islander member of the cabinet more closely in the region. I also think that as part of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation APEC Forum events here in the United States, there is a tremendous opportunity for us to showcase and to bring to the table members of our Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander communities who are, as much as I am the official ambassador of the United States on trade, we have so many unofficial ambassadors and bridge builders in our own country who serve on a day-to-day basis as experts and as the human connective tissue between our economy and our culture and those of the Asia-Pacific.
A lot of initiatives are coursing through APEC. There are a lot of agendas, but some of the interesting ones involve decarbonization. an attention to indigenous populations, which many APEC members have in common, and making sure that the next yuan, ringgit, yen, yuan that comes into an economy, peso, doesn't all go to the same people. Our time is short. I don't know which one to go after. Let's talk about inclusive growth and women's empowerment, because this is something that a lot of the members have in common. Economies that really need to do better by women who are the cornerstones of their economy, but not always treated that way.
Well, on this, I would say I am very proud to be one of the women trade ministers at the APEC ministerial meetings. I do want to give my Canadian counterpart a shout out, Mary Ng, who was born in Hong Kong, raised in Canada, and a member of the Canadian Parliament. There are not that many of us, certainly, and that is a signal that many of us could do better in terms of providing level playing fields and opportunities for the women in our economy. But on this, I think that as the host of APEC in 2023, it's given us a lot of room to run and to show what we value in our economy. And I did want to share with you that we had a lunch at the ministerial where we invited 3 community members from Detroit who have founded very different small businesses, but each of them was incredibly bright, courageous, takes courage and gumption to start your own business, and are so excited about where they will take their businesses. That kind of conversation, I hope, for each of the trade ministers, that as they met these small business founders and owners in Detroit, that they were thinking about the small businesses back at home and the amount of energy and innovation that we all have in our economies, and that we can all appreciate how much opportunity we can unlock by bringing more of those people in small businesses and as workers actively into our economy as productive members. And if we think on it that way, there is so much untapped potential we still have in our economies.
I interviewed a bunch of the ministers, and they were very disciplined about hewing to the APEC thing of keeping politics at arm's length. But it had to be complicated, given the way the Russian invasion of Ukraine has changed the energy profile, the food profile, costs in the world, even affected a lot of the members sitting in the room. Hard to keep politics out because it's causing real downwinds in a lot of member states. Were you able to do that in Detroit? Was it even necessary to do that in Detroit?
I thought a lot about this, about organizations like APEC. G20 is another one where Russia is a member, and how challenging it has been, especially over the course of 2022 and now into 2023, in terms of adapting the way that we work. Having a member who has ventured very far outside the circle of norms that many of us expect from fellow members. I think in a way we can think about it as a feature as opposed to a bug, that discomfort that we have in the room forces us to reckon with the challenges that we have and the lack of alignment that we have between countries in these organizations or economies in the case of APEC. What I do want to highlight, though, is that now as we are over a year into Russia's invasion of Ukraine, you're right, inside of the room, we are very clear-eyed about our disagreements on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Nevertheless, we have figured out ways to continue to have a conversation and continue to look for constructive avenues to cooperate economically. It's not easy, but certainly the dynamic inside of the room was of an honest pragmatism, which I think is going to be important for all of us to navigate through these increasingly difficult years.
Ambassador Katherine Tai is the 19th United States Trade Representative. Great to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Ray.
You've been listening to On Shifting Ground, produced in partnership with KQED, with funding from listeners like you. Today's episode was produced by Elise Manukian, Sienna Barnes, and Andrew Stelzer. It was fact-checked by our intern, Adam Ailey. It was mixed and mastered by Matteo Schimpf. Additional production and engineering were provided by Rob Spate. KQED's Jim Bennett is our technical supervisor. Jared Sport is our executive producer. Philip Yun is CEO of World Affairs. Our music is from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ray Suarez. Thanks for listening.